There's a liquid sitting on a hardware store shelf right now that costs under $2 per application. You can use it on a rotting fence post, a gray and cracking deck, a weathered barn door, a piece of furniture your grandfather left behind. Within hours, the wood transforms. The grain comes alive. The color deepens. The surface stops drinking moisture and starts repelling it. And the protection that liquid delivers does not last one season or 1 year. It lasts decades. When it finally fades, you apply another coat, and the wood survives again. This is not a new formula. It is not a proprietary blend developed in a laboratory. It is not sold in branded squeeze bottles with UPC codes and loyalty program stickers. It is a mixture of two ancient liquids that human beings have been using on wood for over 7,000 years, across every continent and every civilization that ever built anything worth protecting. And in 1939, the year that number of competing alkyd resin manufacturers hit 34, and the synthetic coating industry reached critical mass, the strategy to erase this knowledge was already in motion. Not through regulation, not through scandal, but through something far quieter and far more effective. Through the simple withdrawal of attention. You cannot outlaw something this old. You cannot ban a liquid pressed from flax seeds and distilled from pine stumps. But you can flood every hardware store, every magazine, every home improvement television show with something newer and more profitable. And within 2 generations, the older knowledge simply stops being passed down. The grandmothers who painted their wood every spring stop being asked how they did it. The barn builders who mixed their own treatments stop having apprentices. And a civilization that had protected its structures naturally for thousands of years quietly forgets that it ever knew how. This is the story of boiled linseed oil and pine tar. 2 liquids, 1 ancient formula, and a $12 billion industry that has spent decades making sure the shelf space goes to polyurethane. The oldest known pine tar production facility in the world was found in a series of cone-shaped pits north of Uppsala in Sweden. Researchers tested the residue and radiocarbon dated the oldest pit to somewhere between 540 and 380 BCE. More than 2,400 years ago, Scandinavian craftsmen were burning pine stumps in sealed, oxygen-starved kilns, collecting the dark amber liquid that dripped from the wood as it pyrolyzed under intense heat. That liquid was pine tar, and the people collecting it already knew exactly what to do with it. But go back even further. Archaeologists have found evidence of wood tar use in ancient Mesopotamia dating back more than 7,000 years. The Egyptians used it to waterproof their rivercraft and seal the wooden elements of their structures against the Nile's flooding cycles. The Greeks knew it. Hippocrates wrote about it. The Romans, who engineered wood into infrastructure across 3 continents, treated their timber with it as a matter of standard practice. And in Scandinavia, the Vikings mixed pine tar with linseed oil and painted every inch of their longships before launching into the North Sea, the most violent, salt-saturated freeze and thaw environment that any wooden vessel could face. Those ships crossed the Atlantic. Some of them lasted for decades in active service. The formula that protected them cost almost nothing and required no laboratory to produce. Linseed oil, the second half of this ancient pair, has an even older documented history on wood. It is pressed from the seeds of the flax plant, one of the earliest crops that human beings ever deliberately cultivated. The ancient Egyptians used it as a sealant. Medieval craftsmen across Europe refined it by boiling it with lead to accelerate drying, a process that gave us the product still called boiled linseed oil today, though modern versions use metallic dryers rather than lead compounds. By the time the Renaissance painters were grinding their pigments, linseed oil had been the dominant binder in wood coatings and paints across the entire Western world for centuries. House paint up through the early 20th century was almost exclusively linseed oil-based. Church steeples, farm structures, naval vessels, furniture, floors, all of it was protected with variations of the same natural oil that had been pressed from flax seeds since the time of the pharaohs. In Scandinavia and Northern Europe, builders had combined these 2 liquids into a single treatment that became essentially universal for exterior wood. Pine tar for its deep phenolic antimicrobial compounds, its ability to repel moisture, insects, and fungal growth at the cellular level. Linseed oil for its ability to penetrate deep into wood fiber, polymerize under oxidation, and swell the grain from within rather than forming a brittle film on top. Together, they created something that no synthetic coating has ever truly replicated. Not a surface barrier that traps moisture and eventually fails at the seams, but a living impregnation of the wood itself, feeding it, sealing it, and making it hostile to every organism that feeds on cellulose. Swedish farmers used this mixture on their log cabins and stave churches for 500 years. Some of those structures are still standing today. Now let us talk about what is actually happening at the molecular level when this mixture goes into wood, because the science is not mysticism. It is chemistry, and it is remarkable. Boiled linseed oil consists primarily of polyunsaturated fatty acids, especially alpha-linolenic acid, which accounts for roughly 52 to 55% of its composition. These fatty acids are chemically reactive. When exposed to oxygen in the air, they undergo autoxidation, a process in which the double bonds in the fatty acid chains react with atmospheric oxygen to form free radicals. Those radicals then trigger a cross-linking cascade, where the oil molecules begin bonding to each other and to the cellulose fibers in the wood around them. The oil literally becomes part of the wood. It does not sit on top and slowly peel. It polymerizes inside the fiber network and hardens there, making the wood dimensionally more stable, significantly more resistant to water uptake, and resistant to the microcracking that allows rot fungi to colonize the surface. Pine tar adds a second layer of chemistry that complements this precisely. It is composed of several thousand distinct chemical components, but its protective power comes primarily from its high content of phenolic compounds, turpentine, resin acids, and guaiacol. Phenolic compounds are naturally antimicrobial. They are the same class of chemicals that antiseptic products are built around. Pine tar's phenolics penetrate the surface of the wood and make it chemically hostile to the fungi, bacteria, algae, and insects that cause rot and structural degradation. The resin acids seal the wood against liquid water intrusion at the pore level, and the natural turpentine content acts as a carrier, pulling the active compounds deep into the fiber rather than letting them pool at the surface where the first rain would wash them away. The combined mixture does something that a can of polyurethane is fundamentally incapable of doing. Polyurethane forms a film. That film is initially excellent at repelling water. But wood is not a static material. It expands when it absorbs moisture and contracts when it dries. It does this across its entire life. Every expansion cycle stresses the film a little more. Every contraction opens hairline fractures. Moisture gets under the film through those fractures, and because the film is now trapping it rather than allowing it to migrate out, you get accelerated rot from underneath a surface that still looks intact. A pine tar and linseed oil treatment does not form a film. It becomes part of the wood. When the wood expands, the treatment expands with it. When the wood breathes, the treatment breathes. The protection is not a shell placed over the surface. It is a transformation of the surface itself. Here's the number that the global wood coatings industry valued at over $12 billion annually in 2024 and projected to reach nearly $18 billion by 2033 does not want you to hold in your head for more than a few seconds. A gallon of quality boiled linseed oil costs between $10 and $15. A pint of genuine pine tar costs between $8 and $12. Mixed at a ratio of roughly 50 to 50, that gallon covers between 200 and 400 square feet of raw wood, depending on porosity. 2 applications protect a typical backyard deck. The total material cost is somewhere between $20 and $30. The next touch-up coat goes on in 5 to 10 years, depending on exposure, and it costs $20 to $30 again. There's nothing to replace. There's no membrane cartridge. There are no service intervals. There's no proprietary system that requires you to stay within the brand as ecosystem to maintain your warranty. Compare that to the premium deck coating systems filling the shelves of every home improvement chain. A quality 2-component polyurethane deck system costs $80 to $150 for the materials. It requires proper surface preparation, specific application conditions, and a clear window to recoat before adhesion fails. Within 3 to 7 years, you're peeling it and starting over because any breach in the film becomes an entry point and the delamination spreads. The industry has designed a product that requires you to return to the store. It requires you to hire help for the stripping process. It requires you to buy the primer, the base coat, the top coat, and the sealant. It is not protecting your wood from degradation. It is protecting itself from competition. The tipping point came in 1927 when a chemist named Roy Keenley patented a new class of synthetic resin called the alkyd. By 1933, General Electric had begun commercial production. By 1939, there were 34 alkyd resin manufacturers operating in the United States alone. These synthetic coatings dried faster than linseed oil, yellowed less, and produced a glossier finish that was easier to photograph for magazine advertisements. They were engineered to be sellable. They were formulated with proprietary additives that required supply chain infrastructure to reproduce. They could be patented. They could be branded. And the marketing machinery of the post-war era drove them into every hardware store display in North America and Western Europe with a force that no traditional craftsman's knowledge could resist. A study summarized in archival research on European building practices noted that linseed oil paint had been the dominant exterior wood treatment throughout Europe up to the 1950s. By the 1980s, it had almost completely disappeared from the market. The rate of paint failure and wood rot on even fairly new building facades increased sharply during this transition period, a fact that concerned architects and preservation engineers who recognized the incompatibility between synthetic film-forming coatings and the natural movement of wood. But the market had already shifted, the advertising had already worked. And a generation of homeowners had been trained to see linseed oil and pine tar as primitive and unreliable compared to the sleek, fast-drying synthetic alternatives that promised superior performance and delivered a new product cycle every 7 years. Sweden's historical relationship with pine tar tells you everything you need to understand about how complete this erasure was. Pine tar was Sweden's third most valuable export commodity by the late 17th century. It was so synonymous with the quality supply coming through its capital that buyers around the world called any high-grade pine tar Stockholm tar, regardless of where it originated. The American colonies harvested pine tar so extensively in North Carolina that the residents there became known as Tar Heels, a name the state still carries today. An entire global maritime industry, the ships that connected every continent, depended on this liquid to stay afloat and functional. Within a single generation after World War II, that industry's knowledge base had been replaced by synthetic caulks, epoxy sealants, and fiberglass hulls. Stockholm tar went from being a household term understood by every working person to being something most people have never heard of in one generation. Here's exactly what to do with this information today. Go to any hardware store and buy 1 can of boiled linseed oil and 1 can of genuine pine tar. Not pine tar stain, not a pine tar imitation, pure pine tar. Together, both products will cost you between $20 and $25, and together they will treat more surface area than most people can paint in a weekend. Warm both liquids gently. You can set the cans in a bucket of hot water for 15 minutes. Warmer product has significantly smaller molecular structure and penetrates deeper into the wood fiber. Mix them at a ratio of roughly 50% each in a clean container. Some experienced users add a small amount of pure gum spirits turpentine to thin the mixture further for very dry or dense hardwood. Apply with a stiff bristled natural brush, working the mixture into the grain with deliberate back and forth strokes. You're not painting a surface, you're feeding a material. Work it in. The wood will drink what it needs. After about 30 minutes, wipe off any excess that has not been absorbed. Pooled oil left on the surface will remain tacky and attract dirt. Apply a second coat after the first has dried, typically 24 to 48 hours in warm, dry conditions. 2 coats on raw wood, then reapply every 5 to 7 years for surfaces with direct weather exposure, every 10 or more years for covered or partially sheltered wood. That is all. No stripping, no priming, no film to maintain, no system to buy into. One critical safety note that the industry rarely includes with its cheerful product endorsements. Rags soaked with linseed oil can spontaneously combust through a process called exothermic oxidation. This is not a minor risk. In 1991, a high-rise fire in Philadelphia that killed 3 firefighters was linked to linseed oil-soaked rags. After use, spread your rags completely flat outdoors in a single layer until fully dry, or submerge them in a sealed metal container filled with water before disposing of them. Take this seriously. The liquid is safe to work with. The rags it leaves behind require deliberate handling. Now for the honest part, because this channel does not trade in fairy tales. Linseed oil and pine tar are not a perfect solution for every application. The mixture does not provide UV protection the way synthetics do, and without the addition of UV-absorbing pigments, wood treated with it will still silver slightly in direct sunlight over years. For furniture stored indoors or in covered outdoor spaces, this is irrelevant. For a south-facing deck in full Arizona sun, you may want to supplement with an iron oxide pigment added to the mixture, which is exactly what Scandinavian linseed oil paint makers have done for centuries to protect their building facades from the brutal ultraviolet of long northern summers. The mixture also requires dry wood on application. It will not penetrate wet or sealed surfaces. Strip synthetic coatings before applying. Let rain-soaked wood dry for several days. The wood coatings industry will collect over $12 billion from consumers this year, selling products that are, in many cases, objectively inferior to a formula that Mesopotamian craftsmen developed before writing was widespread. Products that fail in predictable cycles. Products that trap the moisture they promise to exclude. Products engineered not for the longevity of your wood, but for the reliability of your repeat purchase. The formula that protects wood by becoming part of it. The formula that Viking shipwrights trusted with their lives on the North Sea. The formula that kept European farmhouses standing for 5 centuries without a synthetic chemical in sight. Costs $20 and fits in a bucket. This is what was buried in 1939. Not by law, not by evidence, but by the quiet, patient withdrawal of any reason to teach it to the next generation. Your grandparents knew this. Their grandparents applied it every spring without thinking twice. The knowledge did not fail. It was simply starved of the attention that profit-driven industries reserve exclusively for the things that can generate revenue on a subscription basis. If this opens something for you, share it with someone who is about to spend $150 recoating a deck that doesn't need to be recoated every 5 years. Every share keeps this knowledge alive. And subscribe. This is where we keep opening the vaults.